Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, my community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast. And we have a returning guest who appeared probably about 3.5 years ago, back in March 2021, which was episode 123. Gavin Ferrar, who is now the CEO of Central Asia Metals, who are a base metals producer on the AIM market of the London Stock Exchange, and has a copper operation in Kazakhstan and a zinc and lead mine in North Macedonia. With a geology and finance background, Gavin has over 25 years experience working in the London investment banking sector on debt and derivative financing for mining clients of Barclays Capital and equity and debt investment for Investec. He became the CFO in Central Asia Metals back in 2018, before stepping into the CEO's shoes just more recently. Gavin's going to talk about his new role, how the company has progressed during his tenure, and their ESG initiatives and business development activities as well, especially with their recent investment into Aberdeen Minerals. Gavin, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Hi, Rob, and to all your listeners. It's great to be back. Thanks very much for having me on again.
Yeah, certainly. And obviously, it's been 3.5 years now. And obviously, a lot has happened since we last spoke.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, you are now the CEO of Central Asia Metals. So I just wondered if you can just tell our audience a little bit about your career and your background, and then possibly any updates or news that you've experienced now from moving from the CFO into the CEO.
Sure. No, thanks, Rob. Yeah, certainly a privilege to be given the reins at a company like CAML. I think, the team has been working really hard for the last, I guess almost 14 years since we IPO'd on the London Exchange, on the AIM exchange, as you mentioned. During that time, we've constructed a really good little asset in Kazakhstan called Kunrad. We've bought another very good asset in North Macedonia called SASA. We've managed to bring along a bunch of really talented individuals, who are both now running those two operations. Some of them have been with us for 10 years plus. Really good continuity within the business, and I guess my elevation to the CEO role is part of that continuity. And I think that's going to hopefully give shareholders a lot of comfort that you've got people in myself, and then the lady called Louise Rathel, who stepped into the CFO role. Is both of us have been with the business 10 years or so. So you've got two people who understand the business intimately, but are also very keen to drive Central Asia Metals into its next phase of growth. So I think it's so that's quite exciting. I mean, I guess, the longer journey for me, you asked for some background on my career. I'm a geologist by training, and worked for a number of years in industry with Anglo American and then Anglo Gold, both initially in target generation and quite early stage exploration, greenfields exploration, and then more latterly, running feasibility studies on gold projects. And I've been in the industry long enough now that gold project that, I did all the sort of final reserve drilling and feasibility work on and project manage that feasibility study. That's now out of production already. So it shows you how long I've been around. It is around 25 years, and it's been fantastic. I really love the industry. I love the characters in it. I love the challenges that it poses in terms of the technical aspects of it. We're always operating in interesting jurisdiction, as you mentioned as well. I spent quite a long time in investment banking in London, so wrapping the financing around how to build a project and how to finance a mining company, given the capital intensity of the industry and the cyclicality of the commodity prices, that presents all of its own challenges. So I guess where I am now is hopefully in a position where I can bring together all of that experience in both the sort of commercial and finance side and the technical side. As I said earlier, manage this business into its next phase. So, very excited about that.
Yeah. Obviously, you've been with the business for quite a few years now, and obviously you were the CFO. How easy was it to transition into the CEO role? And I suppose with any aspiring CFOs that would like to step into a CEO's role, what are some of the main differences and challenges that you would face as a CEO as opposed to CFO within a mining company?
I think, look, I'm sort of a unique beast in a way, Rob, in that I have that technical background. So I think a lot of more natural CFOs will have had a more accounting and finance background all the way through. So I've got a good mix of both. And I suppose as CFO, I wasn't the kind of guy who was going to compile the accounts and understand IFRS and all that sort of stuff. Where I could add a lot of value there was the commercial aspects of the business and, how we, yes, the finances are very important and, are fundamental to people understanding the health of the business, but it's also then saying, okay, well, if the profits are like this, why are they different from last year to 1 year to the other? What are the technical reasons behind that? And understanding all of those things, and then being able to convey that to whoever was reading the sort of accounts, and when we were presenting results to the market, being able to explain exactly why certain financial metrics had changed outside of macroeconomic factors, right? So if we were spending capex, what were we spending capex on? Why were we spending that capex? If the opex had changed, why was that? Was it because of a technical reason, or was it because of inflation? So I was able to do that, and I think a lot of sort of CFOs in a technical business could benefit from spending time on site. So you don't necessarily have to have the technical background. I mean, these guys are, when you get to that sort of level, generally smart and talented people are doing it. So, but spending time on site is probably the best advice I could give someone who is a financially trained person but wants to be the CFO of a mining company, or any, frankly, technically sort of, is to spend time on the factory floor and spend time underground, spend time in processing plants and understanding all the various elements that go into producing metal ultimately would be the biggest piece of advice I could give on that front. And to answer your question about the changes, I think the big change going from CFO, and I guess from anywhere, to CEO, is that you go from having responsibility for a very discrete part of the business and being able to contribute to the bigger decisions rather than actually making them, to the person who's actually in the hot seat. You're now making the big decisions. You're trying to assimilate the information that's coming at you from a variety of angles. So, on the one hand, you've got access to a much broader range of information, and you need to process that information into a coherent decision-making process, right? Whereas, the CFO prepares you quite well for that, because you are assimilating all that information and then producing a set of numbers. Now you've got to actually make the decisions that influence those numbers. And I think that is the big step up, really.
Obviously, for our listeners that may not have heard of CAML, which is Central Asia Metals Limited, for the first time, I wonder if you can just give us an overview of the company and obviously the operations.
Of course. So I mentioned the assets earlier. So let's start with Kazakhstan. So the company was founded quite, probably in early 2000s, I believe. In 2006, they were granted the license to an asset called Kunrad, which is it's effectively waste dumps that are sitting on surface that were generated during mining from 1938 to 1996. There's 650 million tons of waste material sitting on surface. And they, those of us who remember our history now, so 2008 was the financial crisis. In the run up to that, not much was done on these projects, but in 2009, the whole management of the company changed and brought in, two people who are now on our board. So we've got Nick Clark, who was brought in as CEO at the time, and Nigel Robinson, who's just recently will step onto the board actually in April next year, but has stepped aside as the CEO. Those two guys, plus a third chap called Howard Nicholson, effectively figured out how to monetize those dumps and did a bunch of test work. And then on the basis of all of that, IPO'd the business in 2010. And Kunrad is not a traditional mine. It's effectively a copper processing facility where we're irrigating these dumps with dilute sulfuric acid called raffinate, and that percolates through the dumps and picks up all of the copper on the way through, and we collect the pregnant leach solution, which is the copper-rich solution, trenches that we've excavated around these dumps and then pump it into what's called an SXEW plant, where we strip out the copper and then plate it into big cathode plates of around 60 kilograms each. And that's been a very successful asset for us because there's no mining and no rehandling of the material. We're doing this in situ. The costs are therefore low. So we're not crushing, we're not grinding. The costs are really pumping solution around, plating it onto these cathodes, and then also in the winter keeping the solution warm. We've achieved exceptionally high margins, and in the recent results that we put out in September, the margins that we're achieving at around 72%, which is fantastic, and it puts that asset right in the low end of the copper cost curve. Now, we produced just over 6,800 tons of copper during the first half of this year, and we're guiding that we'll produce 13 to 14,000 tons of copper for the full year in 2024. Small producer, but very profitable. And it's off that platform that we've built Central Asia Metals into the company is today, because we were able to leverage off that platform and purchase the SASA lead zinc mine in 2017. Now, that is a lead zinc mine in North Macedonia. It's also been operating for quite a long time, on and off. It was operating during the former Yugoslav Republic. After the breakup of Yugoslavia, it was effectively mothballed, but then bought by another company called Solway, who owned it for probably around 8-9 years, sold it to a private equity group, and then Central Asia Metals bought it from that private equity group. So what we've really been doing is investing in that asset over the last 6 years in terms of effectively modernizing what was an ex-Soviet era mine. And that involves things like putting Wi-Fi underground, really beefing up the health and safety culture there, investing in elements of plant, new crushers, new mills, that sort of thing, new mining fleet. So what we've done there is taken what is a mine that was producing using what we call sub-level cave, and we're changing the mining methods to something that is going to extract the resource far more efficiently. We're going to use pasteful mining methods there, and will also allow us to place the tailings underground. And we've changed our tailings deposition strategy as well. So there's no longer any need to build any surface tailings facility. So we'll be using effectively the existing tailings facility will be the last facility. We're going to have dry stack tailings and paste backfill going underground. So that's all going to be complete by the end of this year as well. So in essence, what the business now does, we produced just under $104 million of revenue in the first half from those two mines, and at an EBITDA margin of 47%. So just around $49 million of EBITDA, which is a really good rate of return for a mining company, and free cash flow generation of $30 million from those two assets just in the first half. So that sort of gives you an idea of just how profitable these assets are for us. So really good little business, and zero debt on the balance sheet now gives us that flexibility to look at the next stage. And as I mentioned earlier, that's what I'm very excited about. Keeping those operations going and then getting again the next phase on. And I think we'll talk about that later, as you said.
Yeah, and obviously you're company changing the process of obviously transitioning to a new mining method at SAS. I just want you to tell us, and obviously you have explained a little bit about that, but what are some of the advantages of what you're doing now by changing that mining method?
So, the sub-level cave method, is pretty simple. It's a semi-bulk mining method, right? And I think the ore body, up until now has been very amenable to that. We're effectively doing, 21 meter levels with 7 meter sub-levels within that, and then effectively 3 shots to get the ore body flowing out of that cave. What we've since our ownership, we've drilled a lot of holes and got a greater understanding of the geology and the stress regime as we go deeper into the ore body. And two things there. One is fairly obvious: the stress regime is going to increase, so that much increased stresses at depth. And the other is that the ore body actually narrows and bifurcates and pinches and swells a lot more than the original geological modeling had us believe. So that's necessitated the change to these pastefill methods. So if we carried on with sub-level cave, you would effectively have sterilized a whole bunch of the ore body, because you'd have to leave pillars and sills behind to stabilize the ground. So your resource extraction would have been far less efficient and much lower. And the other thing is that with the increased stresses, we'd also, with the narrowing ore body, you'd also end up with higher dilution. Mining dilution using the sublevel cave method. So we made the decision to change on the grounds of those main two issues, right? So the benefits now is that we've got much more efficient extraction of that resource using much more selective mining techniques. We're going to use a combination of cut and fill and long hole stoping, and in conjunction with cemented paste backfill. So what that means is that we can mine an horizon, fill it with the cemented paste, wait for that paste to set, and then mine on top of that. Right? So that ensures the stability of the ground. And the big benefit of that is that from a health and safety perspective, it's much safer than if we continue that depth with that sublevel cave. The other thing, obviously, is we're going to be putting that tailings back underground. So over the remaining life of the ore body, which we've now, with this change in method, incidentally, Rob, has extended that mine life by about 4 or 5 years. So we're now projecting, on the basis of our resources out to 2039. I think when we bought the mine 7 years ago or so, it was around 2034. And there's been a bit of reserve replacement in there, but ultimately it's just all about that efficient extraction of the ore body. But getting back to the tailings, using that paste backfill, we're going to be putting around 40% of our tailings back underground, which allows us to then no longer, in conjunction with the dry stack tailings, build another tailings dam. So what that's meant for our workforce in Macedonia is quite interesting as well, because they've had to adopt a very different way of mining the ore body. And they've been brilliant in terms of embracing it. We have invested quite a lot in training. So we've got some dedicated training personnel out on site. We've with the aid of our equipment suppliers, had simulators on site so they could practice driving new equipment, using the new drills, drilling different patterns, which is the key thing to this, changing these mining methods. So all of that's been done. And through, the first half of 2024, that's been, where we've been implementing these two new mining methods. And I'm pleased to say that, we had a few teething problems, as you'd expect in these things, but in general, the workforce has performed really well. We've had to, reconfigure the mine a little bit, reschedule a few things, but that's all worked out really well. And the guys in the second half of the year are getting up to the run rates that we'd expect to persist through the remaining life of the mine. So, well done to them. And I think, what this means is that, successful implementation of these two new mining methods, just really ensures that we can get that mine life out to 2039 and beyond.
Central Asian Metals have always placed emphasis, obviously, on ESG initiative and credentials. And obviously, this includes your completion of the solar panel project at Conrad and the voluntary compliance at SAS. I just wonder if you can just explain on the company's other ESG initiatives and obviously highlight some of those as well I've just mentioned.
Yeah, of course. So, look, let's start with the two you mentioned. I think that solar power plant, was an initiative that we put into place in Kazakhstan in order to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. As I mentioned earlier, we heat some of the solution up over winter. So we do that by burning coal, and we've had to become far more efficient in terms of how we do that. But more importantly, all of the grid power, and we had connected to the grid in Kazakhstan. And whilst it's, attractively cheap relative to everywhere else in the world, it is all coal powered. So in today's world, we needed to do something about reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. One of the obvious things is that in an area like Kazakhstan, on the Kazakh steppe, you get a lot of sunlight, particularly in summer. So we put a 4.77 megawatt power plant in place there, solar power plant, which we opened in November last year. And what we've seen is in the first half of 2024, this has produced around 15% of the power requirement for the plant. 15% doesn't sound like much, but overall, that sort of 15 to 18% that we expect from that plant on an annual basis will reduce those greenhouse gas emissions by about 10% at that site. So it gives us quite a chunky ESG benefit there. There is an economic benefit now too, because as the electricity price goes up, that plant will effectively start paying for itself. The key thrust there was, part of our goal is to achieve a 50% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 or for 2020 base. And this was part of that program in terms of getting there. The other thing you mentioned was the GISTM conformance. Now, that is a voluntary initiative. Mostly big companies are kind of obliged to do that through their membership of the ICMM. We've taken it on because we think, we try and operate as a big company where we can, and put big company kind of ideas into place where we can and where they're affordable. And this is one area that we thought was very responsible, because we've got our tailings dams are in valleys, and there are communities downstream in those valleys. So managing those tailings dams to best international practice, we think is just the responsible thing to do. But very encouraged by the fact that, what's been a 3-year journey, the recent audit sort of got us to 93% conformance to GISTM, and then 70% on plan to conform. So I think for a company of our size to achieve that is fantastic. And, again, the team on site, with help from some of the guys at head office, have done a fantastic job. That's been the sort of 2 key sort of ESG initiatives over the last couple of years. But sort of wrapped around all of that are the sort of continuing community-focused ESG initiatives we have. Now, we've established foundations at both Kounrad and at SASA, and we commit to spending 0.5% of our revenue, or funding these foundations to the tune of 0.5% of our revenue every year. Now, it doesn't sound like a huge amount, but it does allow us to do quite a lot of work in those communities. And what we've done, for example, in Kazakhstan, we're currently building a youth center, which is around a $400,000 initiative. We've also in the past built centers for disabled kids, shelters and refuges for victims of domestic violence, as well as providing sort of ad hoc support. Most recently in Kazakhstan, we gave $100,000 to flood relief efforts. There was some flooding in central Kazakhstan. So just being a good corporate citizen from that perspective, but also much closer to home, we support the local schools, the local kindergartens, and so on. That's all in. And similarly, in SASA, we've got plans underway alongside the local authorities to put real long-term economic development programs in place, which range from supporting sort of quasi-state initiatives to supporting local entrepreneurs in terms of getting businesses up and running. And then again, as I said, the sort of ad hoc things, donating x-ray machines to the local clinic, so people don't have to travel 50 kilometers to go and get an x-ray. That sort of thing is still forefront of our sort of ESG initiatives as well. Last but not least is the EBIT, where we've got big programs underway in terms of water management at both sites, with an idea to sort of reduce our water abstraction by 75%, surface abstraction of water by 75%. And part of these tailings things I was talking about earlier with the paste backfill and the dry stack, that's going to assist with that, because what we're doing there is just dewatering. In the case of the dry stack, we're taking around sort of 85 to 90% of the water outside of those tailings before we actually place them. So we're not losing a bunch of water to evaporation as we are now in the wet tailings dam, and we'll be recycling all of that through the plant. So, all of those things as a whole, are some examples of what we're doing from an ESG perspective.
Yeah, no, good to hear. Obviously, you've continued to focus on increasing the company's business development activities, and naming, obviously, especially with your investment in Aberdeen Minerals and the establishment of CAML X. I just wonder if you can just tell us a little bit more about these ventures, and also any other business development plans that you may be looking at.
Sure. Well, let me start with the sort of aspiration here. I think, we've got 2 fantastic assets that I described earlier, and they're producing a lot of cash flow, and that allow us to go out and buy other things. Now, ultimately, what we'd love to have is at least another 1 cash flowing asset in the portfolio. So we continue to search and seek out those sorts of opportunities. Those will necessarily be at the larger end of the spectrum in terms of what we'd spend. And by way of example, SASA cost us, $100 million more than our market cap was at the time. We had a market cap of around $300 million when we did that. So, as I mentioned, again, we've got that balance sheet, we've got, good support of shareholders, and we think we've got the firepower to do another transformational deal like that. But those are few and far between. And what we're doing in the meantime is building that pipeline that is going to, feed into ultimately the production profile of the business in 5-10 years' time. Whilst, we're looking at assets at various stages on that development sort of curve, pre-feasibility study things, scoping study things, feasibility study assets. We've all looked at those. We've looked at all of those. What we've actually concluded is the lower end, or the earlier end of the sort of exploration spectrum. So CAML X, as you mentioned, is probably the earliest stage that we're looking at. That is pure greenfields exploration in Kazakhstan. But what we've done there is we've backed a very strong team. So these are guys that have worked in the region and in the country for decades. Between the sort of three guys we've got there, they've got decades of experience with companies like Glencore, Barrick, very experienced, know what they're doing. So we've got a really good relationship with those guys. We own 80% of the company, they own 20%. And moving forward, they'll benefit as much as, from a personal perspective. So they're well incentivized to get some success. But where we are there is really at the target generation stage, generating targets, applying for licenses, and then early stage, geological field work. So that's geological mapping, geochemical sampling, geophysical surveys to try and set up some drill targets. When hopefully, next time we speak in a couple of years, hopefully, or maybe even sooner, I'll be reporting that we're doing some drilling in Kazakhstan. So there'll be, that. Moving further into the sort of advanced exploration sphere, that's what Aberdeen Minerals represents to us. So we've put in £3 million so far. That's got us around 29% of the business. We have the option to add to our ownership there by investing another £2 million. But we'll do that once we've seen the results of some drilling that they're currently undertaking. The idea there was that our geologists saw an analog to the Eagle mine in the US, which is a copper nickel thing owned by Lundin. They saw a lot of similarities between what Aberdeen Minerals was presenting and what they'd seen in their own careers. So convinced management to take a closer look. We really like the team. We like the asset. We think there's very strong geological potential there. But what we're really doing there is the discovery's been made, so we know there's mineralization. It's now trying to prove that there is economic mineralization in that. So initial drill core that's come out the ground looks fantastic. There's massive sulfides in there over long intersections. Still waiting assays. So again, watch the space. I think that's going to be good. But as I said, ultimately, we want to move those up the development curve as quickly as we can. So we've got the resources to do that. I think we don't have to go out and raise capital to do that. We've got the money being generated internally, and then adding to our portfolio of assets with the ultimate aim of, as I said, getting a third operating asset plus a pipeline of or conveyor belt of assets that then come to fruition. It sounds simple when I say it like that, but we've been at this very seriously since the end of lockdown, really. So 3 years of pushing really hard, and in the first half of the year we've looked at 23 opportunities. Of those, I'd say 5 NDAs, 3 site visits, and then a lot of due diligence. But these things fall over for a number of reasons, but we'll keep pushing and pushing and pushing. But I think we've got a great platform.
Yeah. And lastly, looking ahead, obviously, what's going to be your next steps as the CEO, and what do you expect from CAML in the coming months and going into 2025?
I think over the next few months, it's all about completing those transition projects at SASA. So we've got the 3 elements of that the project. One is up and running, which is the paste backfill plant, and we've already put over 130,000 tons of paste underground, or tailings underground actually. So that's going really well. We've got to complete the dry stack tailings plant, complete construction and commission that, and then start emplacement of the dry stack filter cake onto the dry stack landform by the end of the year. And the last element is this, what we call a central decline, which is effectively just a much larger and direct access into the lower depths of the ore body. That's going to reduce haulage times, improve ventilation, and allow our guys to spend much more time at the face. So those 3 elements are just absolutely key for me to get those done by the end of the year. After that, we'll have the capex profile of the business will sort of return what I call to normal sustaining capital sort of levels, which will free up a little bit more cash to go out and focus on some business development. And in the absence of BD, then we'll think about our capital allocation programs. We've been fairly generous in terms of that. We paid a 9p dividend at the interim, so a lot of it will be looking at again what sort of level of dividend we'll be paying when we release our results for the full year probably sometime in March next year. So those are kind of on the next 6 months. Beyond that, it's just really getting that BD sort of team just cranking through the opportunities and hopefully landing one of these opportunities in the medium term. So I think that is the sort of next sort of 6 to 12 months for me, it's really focusing on that. And at the same time, just continuing with that, nice steady production out of SASA and Kounrad, and doing that safely. I think that, for any mining executive, producing safe tons is the first priority. And then everything sort of, if you can do that, then it makes life easier on all the other fronts.
Yeah, certainly. Gavin, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you giving us an update on CAML. And obviously, it seems you've got a lot of work ahead of you. What a success story the company's gone through since you've been with the company over the last 6 or 7 years. And obviously wish you well in your new CEO role. And I'm sure you've got, obviously, surrounded by good people in the management team to make even more success as a business. If our audience wants to reach out to you, if they've got any questions, if they want to follow you on social media and the company, how can they go about doing that? What social media platform channels is the company on?
We're on LinkedIn, and I think we're on Twitter, or called now X. So yeah, feel free to follow us on those two channels. But we've always got a direct line into our info email address. If you look at our website, the contact details are on there. That's on centralasiametals.com. Everyone, welcome to ask questions through that medium, and we try our best to respond to all of those as quickly as we can. But Rob, thanks very much for having me on again. It's been an absolute pleasure. And yes, I think thanks for the kind words about CAML. I'm glad to be part of the journey so far, and hopefully we can continue that success.
Yeah, certainly. And we won't leave it for another 3.5 years next time. So hopefully you can come on during next year and give us an update. And you would have settled into the CEO role by then, and obviously had a bit of obviously 6 or 12 months into the CEO role. Perhaps you can come on and give us an update then.
Yeah, it'd be my absolute pleasure. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, all the best. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed that episode. As always, please keep sharing these episodes far and wide, not just within our mining industry, but people outside of mining. And obviously, as Gavin has alluded to, what a great story Central Asian Metals has gone through their journey, successfully building some operations and successfully being a mining company that is doing good for local communities with their ESG initiatives. So this obviously episode needs to be shared with people outside of our industry also. Thank you again for listening, and until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.